The rain had stopped, but the riverside rest stop was still swallowed by silence. Trucks pulled in and rolled out. Doors slammed shut. No one noticed the 8-year-old girl curled up on the curb, hugging a backpack that looked heavier than she was. She didn't cry. She didn't wave for help. She just stared at the road, as if she were waiting for a car that was never going to come back. When Marcus Blackwell stepped out of the black Escalade, he almost walked right past her, until she spoke, softer than a whisper. "My dad forgot me." He froze. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, calm in a way that felt ice cold. As if being left behind was simply an obvious fact, not something worth crying over. The most powerful mafia boss in the Northeast dropped to one knee, level with the eyes of a child he didn't know. "What do you mean?" "Forgot, sweetheart." She pointed toward the highway, where headlights kept sweeping through the night. "Dad said he'd be back in 5 minutes. That 5 minutes was yesterday." Her phone was dead. No food, no coat, only a name, scrawled across her wrist. Grace Mitchell, already fading with sweat and the residue of dried tears. Marcus Blackwell rose slowly. He didn't call the police. He didn't ask anything else. He turned back to his vehicle, started the engine, and drove away. Only about 200 meters. Then he stopped, because something in the girl's eyes that had seen far too much for an 8-year-old, told him this wasn't carelessness. This was the desperation of a father. And because there are promises that, once broken, can only be mended by the kind of man willing to burn the whole world behind him. Marcus Blackwell was exactly that kind of man. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what he discovers about the father who forgot his daughter, and the mysterious woman they meet along the way, changes the lives of all 4 of them forever. Before we begin, if you believe miracles come from the people who don't walk away, tap like to support the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you won't miss stories that reach the heart. And if someone needs to hear this story, share it with them. The black Escalade turned around in the darkness. Its headlights swept across the wet pavement and landed squarely on the small figure still sitting motionless on the curb. Grace didn't move. She didn't even lift her head when the sound of the engine drew closer, as if it no longer mattered whether someone came back or drove away. Marcus shut off the engine and stepped out for the second time that night. This time he wasn't in a hurry. He walked toward her slowly, each step carrying a question he still didn't know how to shape into words. When he sat down beside Grace on the cold concrete curb, she finally turned to look at him. No fear, no hope, just a measuring stare, as if she were trying to read the intentions of this stranger. "You came back." Grace's voice was as light as breath. "Yeah," Marcus nodded. "I came back." "Why?" That simple question left Marcus silent for a moment. He didn't have an answer, or maybe he did and didn't want to admit it. Instead, he asked one of his own. "Your name's Grace, right? I saw it written on your wrist." Grace nodded, instinctively lifting her hand to rub the fading letters. "Dad wrote it. Dad said if I got lost, people would know who I am." Something tightened in Marcus's chest. A father writes his daughter's name on her wrist before leaving her alone. That wasn't carelessness. That was preparation. Preparation for the worst. "What does your dad do for work, Grace?" "Office work." Grace answered right away, like she'd been taught to say it. "He sits at a computer a lot. He says his job is really boring, but it looks like your dad's job isn't so boring, is it?" Grace went quiet. Her eyes dropped to the backpack resting on her lap, her small fingers gripping the straps as if she were afraid someone might snatch it away. "And your mom?" Marcus asked more gently. "Where's your mom?" For the first time since he'd met her, Marcus saw a flicker of pain move through Grace's eyes. Only a flicker, and then she returned to that strange calm. "My mom's in heaven. She was sick. Cancer. She died when I was 6. The words came out with an acceptance no 8-year-old should ever have. Marcus had met every kind of person in his life. Cold-blooded killers, ruthless bosses, hitmen who didn't know fear. But the stillness in this child made his spine go cold. This was the calm of someone who had grown used to loss, who had learned not to cry because crying didn't change anything. "Do you have any other family? Grandparents? Aunts? Uncles? Anyone?" Grace shook her head. "It's just Dad and me." Dad said, "As long as we have each other, that's enough." Marcus looked around. The rest stop was still empty. Now and then a truck passed, headlights cutting a bright streak before vanishing into the night. No one stopped. No one saw this child, or maybe they saw her and chose not to. "Are you hungry?" Grace gave a small nod. "I ate all the cookies in my backpack yesterday morning." Yesterday morning, meaning this child hadn't eaten anything in nearly 30 hours. Anger surged in Marcus's chest. Not at Grace, but at the world that had left a little girl sitting here alone and starving, while hundreds of cars kept sliding past as if she were invisible. All right. Marcus stood, brushing dust from his pants. I'm going to take you to get something to eat. Then we're going to figure out what happened to your dad. Grace looked up at him, and for the first time there was something different in her eyes. Not quite hope, but maybe curiosity. Who are you? Marcus hesitated for a second. He could have lied, could have made up a name, a normal job, a normal life, but looking into the eyes of a child who'd seen too much dishonesty already, he didn't want to add one more lie. I'm the person who won't leave you here. Grace stood and swung the backpack onto her shoulders. She was so small, the backpack nearly covered her entire back, but she walked steadily, needing no hand to hold, no arm to steady her. My dad said that too, Grace said as she walked toward the Escalade. Dad said he'd never leave me. The sentence hung in the night air, heavier than any accusation Marcus had ever heard. He opened the door for Grace, watched her climb into the back seat and buckle her seatbelt with the practiced ease of a child used to long drives. Marcus slid into the driver's seat and looked into the rearview mirror. Grace was holding her backpack, her eyes turned to the window and the darkness beyond it. He didn't know what he was doing, or why he was doing it. He only knew he couldn't leave this child behind. The Escalade pulled away from the Riverside rest stop, its taillights glowing red, blinking, then disappearing into the night. And Marcus Blackwell, the most powerful Mafia boss in the Northeast, stepped into a war without yet knowing who his enemy was. Streetlights blinked past the car windows like pale, drifting streaks. Marcus drove slower than he usually did, his eyes lifting now and then to the rearview mirror to check on Grace. She'd fallen fast asleep, her head resting against the glass. The backpack still clutched tight in her arms as if it were the only thing she had left in the world. Looking at that small, fragile sleeping shape, Marcus felt an old memory push its way up from the deepest place in his mind, the place he'd tried to bury for more than 20 years. 30 years ago, there had been a child curled up on a sidewalk too, hungry and shaking with cold. That child had been him. Marcus Blackwell, 6 years old, abandoned by his mother outside a church in South Boston on a bitter winter night. She'd said she'd be back in 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes had stretched into forever. He'd never known his father's face. He had no relatives. He had only a name and empty hands. The years that followed were a stretch of hell he never wanted to remember. An orphanage where the straps came down hard. Foster families who wanted nothing but the government checks. Nights on the street at 12 years old because he couldn't take the abuse anymore. Marcus learned early that this world had no place for the weak. You either became strong or you got crushed. He chose to become strong. At 16, Marcus joined his first gang. At 18, he already had a name in Boston's underworld. At 25, he held the southern part of the city in his fist. At 30, no one in the Northeast dared say his name without fear riding alongside it. Marcus Blackwell built his empire out of blood, sweat, and a cold, deliberate cruelty. He never struck when it wasn't necessary, but when it was, he never hesitated. And yet, even in that dark world, Marcus kept one boundary for himself. One principle he never broke, no matter the reason. He didn't touch women. He didn't touch children. That was the last line between him and the truly monstrous. Plenty of men in the life laughed at him for it, called it weakness. But Marcus knew it wasn't weakness. It was how he kept his soul from slipping completely into the dark. Because every time he saw a child abandoned, abused, erased by the world, he saw himself. The 6-year-old sitting outside the church, waiting for a mother who would never come back. The 12-year-old sleeping in a dumpster to escape the cold. The 15-year-old fighting 3 bigger boys just to keep a scrap of bread in his hand. That was why he'd stopped when he saw Grace. Not because he was a good man. Marcus knew better than anyone that he wasn't. He'd done things ordinary people couldn't imagine. He'd given orders he would never speak out loud to anyone. But when he looked into Grace's eyes, those empty eyes, that terrifying calm, he saw the shadow of the child he'd been. The child who'd waited for someone to come back. No one came back for Marcus. But tonight, he would come back for Grace. The SUV kept rolling through the night. Marcus didn't know where he was taking her, or what he was going to do next. He only knew something was deeply wrong. A father didn't leave his daughter at a rest stop for 18 hours unless there was a reason. And whatever that reason was, it was serious enough to make a man write his child's name on her wrist before he vanished. Marcus glanced at Grace in the mirror again. She was still asleep, breathing evenly, her face peaceful in a way she couldn't manage when she was awake. He wondered what she was dreaming about. Maybe her mother. Maybe her father. Maybe a different life. One where she didn't have to sit alone in the dark waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen. Jerome. His right hand, the one man he trusted completely in a world built on betrayal. Marcus hit the button to answer. But before he could speak, Jerome's voice came through, tight with worry. "Boss, where are you? The Chicago meeting ended 3 hours ago. Everybody's asking." Marcus kept his eyes on the dark road ahead. Something came up. "Get me everything you can on a man named Ryan Mitchell, and find the nearest clinic that's still open right now." There was a beat of silence on the other end. "Who's Ryan Mitchell?" Marcus lifted his eyes to the rearview mirror, where Grace slept on, unaware. "That's what I'm trying to find out." The small clinic sat about 15 minutes off the highway, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and insects droned endlessly in the night. Jerome had texted the address only minutes after the call, along with a short note saying it was the only place still open within 50 miles. Marcus pulled up out front and looked at the weather-worn sign. The words Greenwood Community Clinic faded with time. Warm yellow light spilled from inside, a small island of comfort in the cold dark. Grace woke when the car came to a stop. She didn't say anything. She just stared out the window in silence, eyes still heavy with sleep. Marcus got out, opened the back door, and held his hand out to her. "We're going inside. I want to make sure you're okay." Grace nodded, climbing down on her own without needing help. She swung the backpack onto her shoulder and followed Marcus toward the clinic door. The glass door opened with a soft chime that announced a visitor. Inside, the waiting room was empty. Plastic chairs lined the walls in a neat row, and an old television played the late-night news at low volume. The faint smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Marcus scanned the space, the instinct of a man used to measuring every room for exits and hidden threats. A voice came from the reception desk. "Hello, how can I help you?" The voice cut off abruptly. Marcus turned and saw a woman behind the counter holding a clipboard, her eyes wide as she stared at Grace. She looked about 28, brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, her face pale with exhaustion. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't her fatigue. It was her eyes. Deep blue eyes filled with a sorrow that ran far deeper than one sleepless night, the kind of sorrow born from years of pain. And right now those eyes were fixed on Grace as if she were looking at a ghost. The woman stood perfectly still for a few seconds, the clipboard nearly slipping from her fingers. Then she blinked, as if yanking herself awake from a dream, and forced her voice to steady. "I'm sorry, How can I help you?" Marcus stepped closer to the counter, one hand resting lightly on Grace's shoulder. "I found this little girl at the Riverside rest stop. She was there alone for nearly 20 hours. I want to make sure she isn't dehydrated or dealing with any health issues." The woman looked down at Grace, then up at Marcus, then back at Grace again. Her gaze lingered on the oversized backpack on the child's shoulder, on the tired eyes that were somehow strangely calm, on the faint lettering on her wrist. "Oh my God," she murmured, her voice catching. "She was alone that whole time?" Marcus nodded. She didn't ask why he was the one bringing Grace in, or what he was to the child. She simply hurried out from behind the desk and knelt in front of Grace, bringing herself level with the girl's eyes. "Hi, sweetheart. My name's Olivia. I'm a nurse here. Can you tell me how you're feeling?" Grace studied Olivia for a moment, as if deciding whether this woman deserved her trust. Then she answered in a small, quiet voice. "I'm a little tired. And hungry." Olivia smiled, but the smile couldn't hide the pain in her eyes. "All right, I'll check you first, and then I'll find you something to eat. Will you come with me?" Olivia rose and held out her hand. Grace hesitated for a second, glancing at Marcus as if asking permission. He gave a slight nod. The little girl placed her small hand in Olivia's and let her lead her into the exam area. Marcus sat down in a chair in the waiting room, but his eyes never left the door Grace had gone through. Through the small window in the door, he watched the way Olivia cared for her. The nurse checked temperature, blood pressure, and pulse with gentle, careful movements. She spoke to Grace in a soft voice, smiling now and then when the girl answered. There was a tenderness in the way Olivia treated Grace that Marcus recognized immediately. It wasn't the professionalism of a nurse with a patient. It was something deeper, something personal, as if Olivia was seeing someone else when she looked at Grace. 20 minutes later, Olivia brought Grace back out into the waiting room. The girl held a small carton of milk and a sandwich, eating in tiny bites with the caution of someone who was used to going hungry. "She's mildly dehydrated and her blood sugar is low," Olivia told Marcus, her voice still faintly unsteady. "I've had her drink water and eat a little. She needs rest." Marcus stood, his gaze locked on Olivia's. "You looked at her like you knew her." Olivia went even paler. She turned away, pretending to straighten the stack of files on the counter, but Marcus could see her hands shaking. "I don't know her, but you saw someone else when you looked at her." Olivia didn't move, her back still to Marcus. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then she spoke, a whisper, as if afraid of her own words. "She looks like my daughter. So much that when I saw her walk in, I thought I was dreaming." Marcus said nothing. He didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. The way Olivia said "my daughter," not my daughter when she was little, said everything. Grace sat on a plastic chair in the waiting room, her legs swinging where they didn't reach the floor, chewing slowly on the sandwich Olivia had given her. Olivia sat beside her, leaving just enough space so the girl wouldn't feel crowded, but close enough that Grace would know someone was there. Marcus stood a few steps away, his back against the wall, watching the two of them in silence. "Do you have kids?" Grace's voice came out of nowhere, making Olivia flinch. The simple question slid in like a blade, straight into a wound that hadn't healed. Olivia needed a few seconds just to find her breath again. "Why do you ask?" Grace tilted her head, studying Olivia with eyes older than her years. "Because you look at me the way my mom looked at me. My mom used to look at me like that, like I was the most precious thing in the world." Olivia's eyes burned. She tried to swallow down the ache, rising in her throat. "I used to have a little girl. Her name was Chloe." "Used to," Grace repeated softly. "That means she's not here anymore." Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She hadn't said Chloe's name to anyone in 3 years. She'd tried to bury that memory, lock it in a dark corner of her soul and throw away the key. But tonight, looking at Grace, she couldn't pretend anymore. "I'm sorry," Grace said, so sincere it almost made Olivia cry. "I know what it feels like to lose someone you love. My mom's gone too." They sat in silence for a while. A silence that wasn't heavy, but strangely comforting. Two hearts, shaped by loss, trained to live with holes that could never be filled, had somehow found each other in the dark. Grace's gaze dropped and stopped on Olivia's arm. Olivia's sleeve had slid up slightly when she reached for a carton of milk for Grace, revealing a long scar running from her wrist to near her elbow. Time had faded it, but it was still clear, a rough, pale pink ridge against her light skin. "Does it hurt here?" Olivia followed Grace's eyes, instinct telling her to tug her sleeve down and hide it, but she didn't. Instead, she left her arm resting on her lap, letting the scar sit exposed under the waiting room's yellow light. "It's a scar from a car accident. 3 years ago." For a brief moment, memory crashed over her like a violent wave. Olivia saw that night again, the car speeding through the rain, Derek behind the wheel, eyes bloodshot from alcohol, mumbling useless excuses about a gambling debt he couldn't pay. Chloe in the back seat, hugging her stuffed bear, singing softly a song Olivia had taught her. Then the blare of a truck horn, blinding headlights, the scream of metal, and then darkness. When Olivia woke up in the hospital, she was told Chloe was gone. Her little girl, 5 years old, with golden hair, ocean blue eyes, and a smile that could melt any sadness, didn't make it. Derek survived, but he ran the moment he was discharged, leaving Olivia alone with the wreckage of her life. A few months later, Olivia heard Derek had been found in an alley in Chicago, 2 bullets in his head. The police called it a gang hit. Olivia knew it was the price of debts Derek would never be able to pay. "Do you miss her?" Grace's voice pulled Olivia back into the present. "Do you miss your daughter?" Olivia looked into Grace's eyes, warm brown eyes so different from Chloe's blue, and yet carrying the same clarity and honesty. "Every day. I miss her every day. Every time I wake up. Every time I go to sleep. Every time I see a child laughing on the street. She's always here." Olivia pressed a hand to her chest, where her heart was beating. "Here," Grace nodded, as if she understood completely. "I miss my mom like that too. Dad says Mom didn't disappear. She just moved to live inside my heart." Olivia smiled, and for the first time tonight, the smile reached her eyes. "Your dad's right." From the corner of the room, Marcus watched in silence. He saw the way Olivia looked at Grace, a gaze threaded with pain and tenderness. He saw the scar on her arm, the kind that came from something terrible. And he saw the way the two of them connected, 2 wounded souls finding comfort in shared grief. Marcus had met all kinds of people in his life. He knew how to spot a liar, a betrayer, a dangerous man. But he also knew how to recognize the ones who carried wounds that never truly healed. Olivia was one of them. She was alive, breathing, working, but a part of her had died with her daughter 3 years ago. And somehow, tonight, in this small clinic, Grace had touched that dead part and made it tremble back to life. Marcus's phone vibrated in his pocket. He looked down at the screen. A message from Jerome, with an attachment. He opened it and scanned the first lines. His brow tightened. The pieces were starting to fit. and the picture taking shape was anything but pretty. Marcus stepped outside the clinic, leaving Olivia and Grace inside to keep talking. The night air hit his face, sharp with cold, but he didn't notice. His eyes stayed locked on his phone as he read line after line of what Jerome had just sent. He hit call, and Jerome picked up immediately. "Boss, I found quite a bit on Ryan Mitchell." "Talk to me." Ryan Mitchell, 34 years old, an accountant at a company called Sunset Logistics for about 3 years. On paper, it's a normal freight and logistics outfit. But when I dug deeper, Jerome paused for a beat. Marcus could hear keyboard clicks on the other end. Sunset Logistics doesn't exist. I mean, it exists on paper. It's got an address, business licenses, even a website. But there's no real operation, no trucks, no warehouse, no employees beyond a few names on payroll. It's a front. For who? Silence held for a few seconds before Jerome answered. "Victor Marchetti." Marcus felt his whole body tighten. Victor Marchetti. The name came up like a ghost from the past. A West Coast boss who controlled one of the biggest money laundering pipelines in the country. A man who'd built his empire on the blood and bones of anyone foolish enough to stand in his way. Marcus and Victor had never gone head-to-head. Their territories didn't overlap, and both men were smart enough to avoid a war that wasn't necessary. But Marcus knew exactly what Victor was. Ruthless, unforgiving, and with no moral limits at all. Anything else? Yeah. Jerome took a slow breath. I pulled traffic camera feeds along Highway 65, from the Riverside rest stop back south about 50 miles. I found Ryan Mitchell's car, a blue 2018 sedan. He left the rest stop at 3 yesterday afternoon. Alone. Looks that way. But there's a problem. What problem? There was another car. Black sedan, tinted windows, no plates. It shows up on at least 4 different cameras, always holding about 200 meters behind Ryan Mitchell. When Ryan stopped at the rest area and left his daughter, the black car stopped too. Parked on the far side of the lot across the road, far enough not to be noticed, close enough to watch. Marcus gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. They were watching him. Not just watching, boss. They were hunting him. And based on where they parked, I think they saw him leave the kid too. Marcus turned his head and looked through the clinic's glass. Grace was still sitting beside Olivia, her small hands wrapped around a carton of milk, her mouth moving as she said something that made Olivia smile. An 8-year-old who didn't know she was in the sights of the most dangerous people Marcus had ever encountered. "Who is Ryan Mitchell to Marchetti?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping lower. "Chief accountant. The guy who holds all the financial books for the laundering operation. If Ryan Mitchell decides to talk to the FBI, he could bring down Marchetti's whole empire. Then why hasn't Marchetti killed him? Maybe he needs something from Ryan first." Or Jerome hesitated. Or Ryan has something Marchetti wants back. Something more valuable than his life. Marcus looked at Grace again. She was clutching that backpack like it was the most precious thing in the world. The backpack she never let go of. Not while sleeping. Not while eating. Not even while Olivia examined her. A thought flashed through Marcus's mind. "Jay, check if there's anything about the FBI investigating Marchetti, especially in the last 6 months. Let me see." Keyboard clicks rattled for a few seconds. "Yeah. There've been rumors in the life that the FBI is building a major case against Marchetti. They've been working it about 18 months. And recently, there's talk they've got an inside witness. Someone with access to the financial books. Ryan Mitchell. Looks that way." Marcus drew a slow breath and stared up at a starless sky. It was starting to make sense. Ryan Mitchell hadn't abandoned his daughter. He'd been trying to protect her. He knew Marchetti was watching, knew he might not survive, and he'd done the only thing he could. He'd hidden Grace in a place the hunters wouldn't think to look. An anonymous rest stop off an empty highway. But if Marchetti's people saw Ryan leave Grace behind, that meant they knew she existed. And in a world run by men like Marchetti, children weren't innocent. Children were leverage. "Jay, find me a safe house. Clean. Off the books. Nobody knows about it except you and me." "What's going on, boss?" Marcus looked into the clinic one last time before turning away and walking toward the SUV. "We might not be the only ones looking for that little girl." Marcus walked back into the clinic. His eyes swept past Grace and stopped on the backpack, still resting neatly in the child's lap. Olivia caught the shift in his expression. A hard edge. A chill she hadn't seen since the moment he first stepped through the door. She stood up, instinctively moving a little closer to Grace. "What is it?" Marcus didn't answer her right away. Instead, he pulled a chair over and sat across from Grace. He lowered his voice to the gentlest tone he could manage. "Grace, I need to ask you a few things. About your dad. About the last night before he left you at the rest stop. Grace stopped drinking her milk. Her brown eyes locked on Marcus with a wariness no 8-year-old should ever have. Why do you want to know? Because I think your dad is in danger. And I can't help him if you don't tell me what happened. Grace was quiet for a moment. Her small fingers tightened around the backpack. Then she took a slow breath, as if bracing herself to tell a story she'd been trying to keep buried. That night, Dad was really strange, she began, her voice small but steady. Dad stayed up all night. I heard him walking back and forth in the living room. When I went out to look, Dad was crying. Olivia lifted a hand to cover her mouth. Her heart clenched. Your dad cried. Grace nodded. I'd never seen Dad cry. Not even when Mom died. Dad always said he had to be strong for me. But that night he held me and cried. He said he'd done wrong things. He said he was trying to fix them. But there were very bad people who wanted to hurt him. He said if something happened, I had to be brave. A cold line ran down Marcus's spine. A father preparing his daughter for the possibility that he wouldn't come back. That wasn't planning for a business trip. That was planning for death. Did he give you anything? Marcus asked carefully. Did he tell you to hold on to something important? Grace hesitated. Her eyes flicked down to the backpack, then back to Marcus, then to Olivia. She was weighing whether she should trust them. Finally, she slowly unzipped the backpack and reached inside. Dad told me to keep this. Dad said it's the most important thing. Dad said I should only give it to someone I truly trust. Grace pulled out an old notebook. The cover was brown leather, worn and frayed at the edges. She set it on her lap and stared at it for a moment before holding it out to Marcus. Dad said it was insurance. I don't understand what insurance is, but Dad said it would keep me safe. Marcus took the notebook, feeling its weight in his hands. He opened the first page, and instantly, he understood why Ryan Mitchell was being hunted. The pages were packed tight with numbers, names, dates, bank account details in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, Singapore. This wasn't ordinary record-keeping. It was a detailed map of a massive money laundering pipeline. Each transaction was logged with care, time, amount, source, destination. Marcus flipped through, his eyes catching familiar names from the underworld. Businessmen, politicians, judges, all of them tied to one name that appeared again and again. Victor Marchetti. These are Marchetti's books. Marcus whispered, his voice gone rough. His entire financial empire is in this notebook. Olivia stepped closer, looking over Marcus's shoulder. What does that mean? It means this notebook could put Victor Marchetti and dozens of others in prison for the rest of their lives. And it also means anyone holding it becomes his #1 target. Marcus kept turning pages, his mind working at a brutal speed. Then he stopped at the inside of the back cover. Something had been taped there, hidden under a thin layer of paper. He peeled it back carefully. A small key dropped into his palm. A brass key, the kind used for locker rentals at train stations or bus terminals. A set of numbers was engraved on the shaft. 47. Did your dad say anything about this key? Marcus asked Grace. She nodded, and a brief sadness passed through her eyes. Dad said if something happened to him, I had to take the notebook and the key to a place called Union Station in Kansas City. Dad said there's a locker there. Number 47. Dad said inside there's something that would help me find someone who could protect me. Marcus stared at the key in his hand, then at the notebook, then at Grace. The picture sharpened. Ryan Mitchell wasn't only running, he was running toward something, trying to deliver something to someone. The FBI, most likely, but he knew he might not make it, so he built a backup plan. He put the evidence in his daughter's hands. He left a trail, a place, a number, a hope that if he fell, someone would find Grace and carry on the road he'd started. Kansas City, Marcus murmured. About 200 miles from here. What are you going to do? Olivia asked, her voice tight with fear. Marcus stood. He tucked the notebook and the key into the inside pocket of his coat. I'm going to find out what happened to this little girl's father, and I'm going to make sure the people hunting him don't find her. Olivia looked at Grace, then at Marcus. A decision formed in her eyes. I'm coming with you. Marcus turned back to Olivia, his eyes narrowing. You don't understand what you're saying. The people hunting this little girl aren't the kind of people you want anywhere near your life. Olivia didn't answer right away. She stood there, her face pale under the clinic's yellow light, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. When she finally spoke, her voice shook. But there was a determination in it Marcus hadn't expected. Marchetti. She whispered the name like a curse. Victor Marchetti. You know him. Olivia lifted her head. Her blue eyes were full of tears, but not one of them fell. He's the man who destroyed my life. Marcus said nothing, waiting. Grace sat still too, wide-eyed, watching Olivia with an understanding that didn't belong to an 8-year-old. The clinic sank into a heavy, quiet, broken only by the clock ticking on the wall, and Olivia's uneven breathing. "My ex-husband," Olivia began, sounding like she was forcing each word past a knot in her throat. "Derek. He was addicted to gambling. At first I didn't know. He hid it well. By the time I found out, he already owed a massive amount of money. I thought it was bank debt, credit cards, the kind of thing you could solve. But it wasn't. He owed Marchetti." Olivia nodded. A single tear finally slid down her cheek. "I didn't know until it was too late. Derek borrowed money from Marchetti's people to pay off gambling losses. But then he took that money and gambled again. The spiral just kept going. The original debt multiplied tenfold within a year." Olivia stopped, pulling in a deep breath. Like she needed courage just to keep going. "That night Derek came home panicked. He said we had to run immediately. He said they were coming. I didn't understand what was happening. Chloe was asleep. I had to wake her up and carry her to the car while Derek drove like a madman. It was pouring. He'd been drinking. I begged him to stop, to let me drive, but he wouldn't listen." Olivia's voice cracked, but she kept going. "We made it about 20 minutes before the crash. A truck came at us in the opposite lane. Derek jerked the wheel too hard. Our car went off the road and rolled 3 times. When I woke up, I saw Chloe, my daughter. She was still holding the stuffed bear I bought her for her 5th birthday. But she didn't move. She wasn't breathing." Olivia sobbed without sound, her shoulders shaking. Grace stood and walked over to her, slipping her small hand into Olivia's. The child didn't say anything. She just stood there, letting her presence be comfort. Marcus remained motionless, a slow fury smoldering in his chest. He'd heard plenty of tragic stories in his life, but something about the way Olivia told this one, the pain soaked into every word, made it feel like someone was squeezing his heart. "What about Derek?" Marcus asked, his voice lower. "He survived," Olivia answered, bitterness sharpening her words. "He survived and ran the moment he left the hospital. He left me alone with the ruins. 3 months later, I heard he'd been shot to death in an alley in Chicago. The police called it a gang hit, but I know it was Marchetti's men, so he doesn't forgive people who owe him money. No, and he doesn't let anyone live if they know too much." Olivia wiped her tears with the back of her hand, then lifted her chin and looked Marcus straight in the eye, with a resolve she'd thought she'd lost a long time ago. "For 3 years, I've been living like a ghost, running from everything, running from memories, running from pain, running from myself. I thought if I hid somewhere far enough, quiet enough, I could forget. But tonight, seeing Grace, hearing Marchetti's name, I realized I can't keep running." "What do you want?" "I want to go with you," Olivia said, her voice steadier than it had been all night. "I want to make sure Marchetti doesn't destroy another family. I want to make sure Grace doesn't lose her dad the way I lost my daughter. And maybe this is the only way I can keep living." Marcus looked at Olivia, then down at Grace, still holding her hand. 2 females, one grown and one small, both stripped of the people they loved most, both carrying wounds that would never fully heal. And somehow, in this night, they'd found each other. "You know this is going to be dangerous," Marcus said. "These people aren't the kind who show mercy." Olivia nodded. "I know. But I've already lost everything there is to lose. I've got nothing left to be afraid of." Marcus was silent for a moment, weighing it. Then he nodded. "All right, but you follow every instruction I give you. No exceptions." Olivia nodded. Grace squeezed her hand tighter. "You're a good person," the girl whispered. "I'm glad you're coming." Olivia dropped to her knees and pulled Grace into an embrace, the kind of embrace she hadn't dared give anyone in 3 years. "I won't let anyone hurt you. I promise." The 3 of them walked out of the clinic in silence. The night was later now, colder, and the darkness felt thicker, almost heavy. Marcus opened the SUV door for Olivia and Grace, waited until they were settled in the back seat, then moved around to the driver's side. He'd barely started the engine when the phone in his coat pocket vibrated. It wasn't Jerome. It wasn't any number he recognized. Marcus stared at the screen for a second, then answered, lifting the phone to his ear. Marcus Blackwell. A man's voice came through the line, younger than Marcus expected, but carrying the arrogance of someone used to being feared. "I hear you picked up something that doesn't belong to you tonight." Marcus didn't respond. His eyes slid to the rearview mirror, tracking the dark road behind them. "My name is Anthony Marchetti," the voice continued. "Victor Marchetti's nephew. I think you know that name." "I do." "Good. Then you also know you're getting involved in something that has nothing to do with you. The little girl you're holding, she's got something that belongs to my family. I want it back." Marcus glanced in the mirror again. Grace sat beside Olivia, her eyes wide, watching him with worry. She couldn't hear the call, but she could feel the tension filling the car. What you're talking about is an 8-year-old child, Marcus said evenly, like he was commenting on the weather. That child is the daughter of a traitor, Anthony snapped. Her father stole something very important from us, and I've got reason to believe the girl's holding it. So what are you going to do? Kill a kid to get back a few pages of paper? I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect my family. Anthony's voice turned hard. You've got until tomorrow morning to hand over the girl and whatever she's carrying. After that, we can pretend this little meeting never happened. You go back to your territory, I go back to mine. Nobody has to die. A cold anger rose in Marcus's chest. He'd heard threats all his life, from men far more dangerous than Anthony Marchetti. But there was something about a man like that daring to threaten a child that made Marcus want to reach through the phone and close his hands around his throat. Listen, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous whisper. I don't know who gave you my number, or who told you that you could call me at midnight and make demands, but I'll tell you this once, and only once. This little girl is under my protection. If I see any of your people come near her, I'll send them back to your uncle in garbage bags. And if you keep pushing me, I'll come see you myself and explain exactly why that's a bad idea. Silence held on the other end for a few seconds. When Anthony spoke again, the confidence had leaked out of his voice. You're making a big mistake, Blackwell. You don't know who you're up against. I know exactly who I'm up against. The question is whether you do. Marcus ended the call without waiting for an answer. He looked into the rearview mirror again, and his heart beat faster. About 300 meters back, a black sedan was following them, its headlights off, moving only by the spill of streetlights. They're tailing us, Marcus told Olivia, calm voice, ice in his eyes. Keep Grace down. Olivia didn't ask questions. She pulled Grace lower on the seat and used her own body as a shield. Marcus hit the gas. The Escalade surged forward. He cut left suddenly onto a side road, then right, then left again, trying to shake the car behind them. At the same time, he called Jerome. Jay, plans changed. Send me the safe house address right now. We've got a tail. Copy that. Sending it now. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message containing coordinates. He entered them into the navigation system, and the SUV tore into the night, heading toward the rolling hills. The Escalade turned onto a rough dirt road after nearly an hour of nonstop driving. Marcus had shaken the black sedan about 20 minutes earlier, but he still checked the rearview mirror by instinct every few seconds. The trees on both sides of the road grew thicker and thicker, and moonlight slipping through the canopy painted faint, ghost-like streaks across the ground. Grace had fallen asleep in Olivia's arms, her face peaceful in a way she couldn't seem to manage when she was awake. The cabin appeared at the end of the road like a dark shape tucked into the forest. No porch light, no sign that anyone was inside. But the moment Marcus stopped and killed the headlights, the front door opened and a tall figure stepped onto the porch. Jerome Washington, or Jay, as Marcus usually called him, stood there with his familiar, watchful posture. 40 years old, dark-skinned, built like a former Marine, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd been beside Marcus for 15 years, from the earliest days when Marcus was still building his empire to now, when he was the most powerful man in the Northeast. Jerome wasn't just Marcus's right hand. He was the only person Marcus trusted completely. Boss. Jerome nodded as Marcus got out. I set everything up the way you asked. Food, water, clean clothes, and weapons if we need them. Marcus nodded and opened the back door so Olivia could lift Grace out. Still asleep. Who's that? Jerome asked, his eyes sliding over Olivia with careful evaluation. Olivia. She'll be with us for a while. Jerome didn't ask anything else. He knew better than anyone that once Marcus made a decision, it was final. Inside, the cabin was far warmer than its empty exterior suggested. Jerome had lit the fireplace and laid out blankets and pillows on the sofa and on the bed in the small bedroom. Olivia set Grace down on the bed, tucked the blanket around her carefully, then sat beside her, watching the innocent face sunk deep in sleep. She's so strong, Olivia whispered, not sure who she was even speaking to. Stronger than adults. Grace shifted, her eyes fluttering open. Where are we? Somewhere safe. Olivia smoothed the girl's hair. Go back to sleep. Can you tell me about Chloe? The question stole Olivia's breath for a second. She looked into Grace's brown eyes and saw not childish curiosity, but the understanding of someone who'd lived with loss. Chloe liked purple. Olivia began, her voice as soft as breath. She loved strawberry ice cream and hated broccoli. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up because she loved animals. She could talk to the neighbor's cat for hours, like the cat understood everything. Grace smiled faintly. She's like me. I like talking to animals too. Olivia felt tears rise, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she took Grace's small hand. "Go to sleep. Tomorrow we'll talk more." Grace nodded, her eyes slowly closing. A few minutes later, her breathing evened out again. Olivia stood and stepped into the living room. Marcus was outside on the porch by himself, his back to the door, staring into the thick black night that surrounded the cabin. Jerome had gone to rest in the back room. Olivia hesitated, then pushed the door open and stepped out. "You're not sleeping." Marcus didn't turn. "I don't sleep much." Olivia stood beside him, leaving just enough distance so neither of them felt crowded. They looked out at the forest in silence. Insects hummed and the wind moved through the leaves, the only sounds in the night. "You have a scar," Marcus said suddenly. "On your arm." Olivia lifted her hand instinctively, rubbing the scar even though her sleeve covered it. "It's from the car crash." Marcus nodded, still facing forward. "What does it remind you of?" Olivia went quiet for a moment, thinking, "It reminds me I'm still alive, even when there were times I wished I wasn't." Marcus turned to look at her for the first time since she'd stepped onto the porch. His eyes, usually cold and unreadable, held something now that came close to understanding. "My scars aren't visible," he said, his voice lower. "But they're here." He touched his chest. "And here." He tapped his head. Olivia looked at him and, for the first time, understood that beneath the hard shell of a powerful Mafia boss, Marcus Blackwell was still just a man carrying his own wounds. "Why are you helping Grace?" Olivia asked. "Really, why?" Marcus stayed silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentler than Olivia had ever heard it. "Because 30 years ago, I was a kid left behind in a place nobody noticed, and nobody came back for me. They stood there in the dark, two scarred silhouettes in the night, and somehow, they'd found each other in the shadows." The night kept moving, but Marcus didn't sleep. After Olivia went inside to rest with Grace, he sat down at the wooden table in the living room, switched on the small desk lamp, and pulled out Ryan Mitchell's notebook. The warm yellow light fell across pages packed with dense handwriting, each line another piece of a massive criminal machine Victor Marchetti had built over decades. Marcus turned the pages carefully, his eyes scanning the numbers and names with razor focus. Ryan Mitchell wasn't just an ordinary accountant. He was a keeper of secrets. Every transaction, every transfer route, every shell company had been recorded with a precision so meticulous it felt obsessive. This wasn't the work of a few months, or even a few years. It was the work of a man who had spent an entire career collecting proof. He stopped at a page near the back. Unlike the others, crowded with figures and corporate names, this one held a single line of messy handwriting, as if it had been written in a hurry. "Locker 47. Union Station, Kansas City. If anything happens, find Catherine Chen." Marcus frowned. Catherine Chen. The name felt familiar, but he couldn't place it right away. He picked up his phone and called Jerome. "Jay, I need you to check a name. Catherine Chen. Might be tied to the FBI. "Hold on." Keyboard clicks sounded on the other end. Jerome had been awake all night monitoring things, the way he always did whenever Marcus needed him. A few minutes passed before Jerome spoke again. "Got her. Catherine Chen, 42 years old, FBI Special Agent, Organized Crime Unit. She's been the lead on the case against Marchetti for 18 months. So Ryan Mitchell really was working with the FBI. Looks like it. But there's a problem." "What problem?" Jerome went quiet for a second, like he was choosing his words. "There are rumors in the life that the FBI case has a leak. Someone on the inside has been feeding Marchetti information. That could be why Ryan had to run even with FBI protection. He didn't know who to trust anymore." Everything sharpened in Marcus's mind. Ryan Mitchell had agreed to help the FBI bring Marchetti down, but when he realized there was a mole inside the bureau, he understood he wasn't safe. He had to run, had to stash the evidence somewhere secure, and most of all, he had to protect his daughter from the people hunting him. "Locker 47 at Union Station," Marcus murmured. He left something there. Could be copies of the evidence, or information on how to reach someone he trusts in the FBI, Jerome said. If Ryan Mitchell is still alive, he might be waiting for someone to pick it up, or he's hoping Grace finds someone who can get her there. Silence stretched between them. Marcus looked down at the notebook on the table, then toward the bedroom where Grace was sleeping. An 8-year-old carrying a weight grown men wouldn't dare shoulder, and her father, wherever he was, had placed all his hope in the idea that someone would find his daughter and finish what he'd started. "How far is Kansas City from here?" Marcus asked. "About 200 miles, Jerome replied. "If we leave at dawn, we can get there around 6 in the morning. Get the car ready. We're leaving at 4. Boss." Jerome hesitated. Marchetti's people are going to be watching every route into Kansas City. They know Ryan might have left something there. I know. But it's the only lead we've got to find out if he's alive or dead. And it's the only way to end this. Marcus ended the call and sat in the dark for a long time, the notebook still on the table in front of him. He thought about Ryan Mitchell, an ordinary accountant who dared to stand up to one of the most dangerous mafia bosses in America. He thought about Grace, a child who'd already lost her mother and might now lose her father too. And he thought about Olivia, a woman who'd lost everything, yet still rose to protect a child she'd only just met. 3 lives, 3 scarred souls, and a road leading deeper into darkness. Marcus stood, slipped the notebook into his coat, and walked toward the bedroom. He needed to wake Olivia and Grace. They had a long drive ahead. The Escalade rolled out of the safe house while the sky was still pitch black. Marcus was behind the wheel. Jerome sat in the passenger seat with a handgun tucked beneath his jacket. Olivia and Grace were in the back. The little girl looked more awake after a few hours of rest, though fatigue still lingered in her eyes. The road stretched ahead like a strip of black ribbon under the headlights, with endless fields on either side swallowed by darkness. About an hour after they left, Grace began talking to Olivia in her familiar soft voice. "Can you tell me more about Chloe?" Olivia looked down at Grace's face in the dim glow from the dashboard. She'd thought saying Chloe's name would tear her open, but strangely, speaking about her to Grace brought a lightness Olivia hadn't felt in 3 years. Chloe loved to sing, Olivia began, her voice warmer now. She'd sing songs from cartoons. Her favorite was one about a princess who wanted to build a snowman. Every morning when she woke up, she'd sing it while she brushed her teeth. Grace smiled a little. My mom liked to sing too. She had a beautiful voice. Dad said her voice sounded like wind chimes. Every night before bed, she'd sing me to sleep. How long was your mom sick? Almost a year. Grace answered, calm, but with a faint tremble underneath. At first, she was just tired. Then her hair started falling out. Then she had to go to the hospital. I visited her every day after school. She always smiled when she saw me, even though I knew she was hurting. Olivia's eyes stung. She took Grace's hand and squeezed gently. Your mom loved you so much. I know, Grace nodded. Mom said even if she wasn't with me anymore, she'd still watch me from heaven. She said whenever I saw the brightest star in the sky, that was her smiling at me. Chloe is your star too, Olivia whispered. The brightest one. They sat in silence for a while, hands still clasped, finding comfort in the shared ache. Up front, Marcus listened through the rearview mirror. He didn't speak, but his eyes softened slightly. Jerome noticed and glanced at his boss with a questioning look, but he didn't ask. When the sky began to pale at the horizon, Olivia moved up to the front seat after Grace fell asleep again. She sat beside Marcus, while Jerome moved to the back to keep watch. Aren't you tired? Olivia asked, watching Marcus drive with steady focus even after being awake all night. I'm used to it. Used to not sleeping. Used to not having anyone I trust enough to close my eyes. Olivia went quiet for a moment, turning his words over. You said you were abandoned when you were little. What happened after that? Marcus didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed forward, but Olivia could see his jaw tighten, like he was holding something down. Orphanage, he finally said. Then foster families who only wanted the government checks. Then the streets. I learned that if I wanted to survive, I had to take care of myself. Nobody else was going to do it. So you became who you are now. I became what this world forced me to become, Marcus replied. There was no excuse in his voice, only acknowledgement. I'm not proud of what I've done, but I'm not sorry either. Olivia nodded slowly. She understood. Maybe she was one of the few who could. They were both products of brutal circumstances, both drained by the world and forced to find a way to live by whatever means they had. I used to think I'd have a normal life, Olivia said quietly, her voice drifting. A small house, a husband who loved me, kids. I never thought I'd end up like this. Life never happens the way we plan, but sometimes it brings us where we need to be. Olivia looked out the window as dawn stained the horizon red, like tonight. If none of this had happened, I wouldn't be here, and Grace would still be sitting alone at that rest stop. Marcus didn't speak, but he gave a small nod. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was a reason in all of it. Suddenly, Jerome spoke from the back seat. Boss, we've got a tail. Black SUV, about 300 meters back. It's been on us since we left the main highway. Marcus checked the rearview mirror and recognized the vehicle immediately. He didn't change speed or direction. He kept driving as if nothing had happened, while his mind ran through options. How far to Kansas City? About 50 miles, Jerome answered. Marcus nodded. his grip tightening on the wheel. "Take this," he told Olivia, handing her his phone. "If anything happens, call the first number in the contacts." Then he hit the gas. The Escalade surged forward. The SUV behind them accelerated too, no longer bothering to hide. Marcus cut hard onto a side road, tires screaming against asphalt. The SUV followed, the gap shrinking. But Marcus knew these roads. He'd studied the map all night. He turned again and again, left then right then left, steering the Escalade into an abandoned industrial zone lined with old warehouses. The SUV stayed with them, but the distance began to stretch as the driver struggled with terrain he didn't know. Finally, after 10 minutes of pursuit, Marcus slipped out of the industrial area through a shortcut only locals would know. The SUV vanished from the mirror. "They'll come back," Jerome said, his voice tight. "I know," Marcus replied, eyes locked on the road ahead. "But we'll get to Kansas City first." Kansas City came into view in the dawn light, like a painting made of high-rises and streets still quiet in the early hour. Marcus drove the Escalade through the calm roads, his eyes sweeping every corner for any sign of threat. Union Station sat in the center of the city, an old building with grand Beaux Arts architecture that had stood for more than a century. He pulled into the underground parking garage, shut off the engine, and turned to look at the others in the vehicle. "I'm going in alone," Marcus said, leaving no room for argument. "Jay, you stay here and watch. If you see anything off, you drive away immediately. Don't wait for me." Jerome nodded, his hand already resting on the gun beneath his jacket. "What about me?" Olivia asked. "You stay with Grace." Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror where Grace was still asleep, her face peaceful in a way she could only find in dreams. "Protect her. That's priority number 1. Olivia nodded, her eyes steady with resolve. Marcus stepped out, crossed the garage, and headed into Union Station's main building. Inside, the Great Hall was quiet at that hour, with only a few cleaners and a handful of travelers waiting for early trains. The ceiling soared overhead with intricate detailing, and light from the tall windows began to spill in as the sun climbed. Marcus moved through the main hall and down the stairs into the basement level where the lockers were. The locker area sat in a tucked-away corner, fluorescent lights flickering and casting a cold mood over everything. Hundreds of metal lockers lined the walls in long rows, each door marked with an engraved number. Marcus walked down the rows, scanning until he found locker 47. It was at the very end, near an emergency exit, the perfect spot for someone who needed a fast escape. He pulled the brass key from his pocket, slid it into the lock, and turned. The latch gave with a soft click. Marcus opened the door and looked inside. A thick brown envelope sat at the bottom of the locker. Beside it was an old cell phone. Marcus reached for the envelope. Then the phone rang. He froze for a heartbeat, staring at the screen that read, "Unknown number." Then he answered, "Blackwell." The voice on the other end was exhausted, rough like the speaker hadn't slept in days, but there was unmistakable relief in it. "Mitchell. Thank God." Ryan Mitchell let out a breath. "I didn't know who would find this locker. I only hoped Grace would find someone she trusted to bring her here. I didn't expect it to be you. Where are you?" "FBI safe house, about 10 miles from you. But I can't leave. There's a mole inside. Someone's leaking information to Marchetti. I don't know who to trust anymore." Marcus's eyes swept the locker room, instinct on alert for any moving shadow. "Is Grace okay?" Ryan asked, his voice catching. "Please tell me she's okay. She's safe. She's brave. Braver than most adults I know." Marcus heard Ryan break, a strangled sob, the sound of a father who hadn't known for nearly 2 days whether his daughter was alive or dead. "I'm sorry," Ryan said when he managed to steady himself. "I'm sorry I dragged her into this. I didn't have a choice. They were getting close. I knew if they caught me with Grace there, they'd use her to force me. I had to hide her somewhere they'd never expect. A rest stop off the highway." "Yeah," Ryan said. "I wrote her name on her wrist so if someone found her, they'd know who she was. I gave her the notebook and the key because I knew it was insurance. If I die, that notebook makes sure Marchetti pays. And the key leads whoever finds Grace here to this phone, so I could know she was still alive." Marcus went quiet for a moment, absorbing it. A father who'd planned for every outcome, even his own death, just to protect his daughter. "What's in the envelope?" "Copies of all the evidence," Ryan said. "And direct contact information for Agent Catherine Chen. She's the only one in the bureau I still trust. You need to hand that envelope to her." "What about you?" "I'll try to get out. But if I can't..." Ryan hesitated. "If I can't, please protect Grace. Please make sure she's safe. I'll owe you my life." Marcus looked down at the envelope in his hand, then up at the dim ceiling of the locker area. I'll protect her, he said, voice low and solid. That's a promise. Marcus shoved the envelope into the inside pocket of his coat and moved quickly out of the locker area. His heart was beating faster than usual. Not from fear, but from a bad feeling rising hard in his chest. The call with Ryan Mitchell had lasted longer than he'd expected. Nearly 15 minutes. Too long to leave Olivia and Grace alone out there. He crossed the main hall of Union Station in long strides, forcing himself not to run, not to draw attention. But when he pushed through the door into the underground garage, his heart seemed to stop. The Escalade was still parked where he'd left it, but the doors were wide open, and the inside was empty. Marcus lunged to the vehicle, his eyes sweeping every corner of the garage. No one. No Olivia. No Grace. No Jerome. Only dark bloodstains on the concrete beside the rear door, and Olivia's phone shattered a few yards away. Marcus's phone vibrated in his pocket. He looked at the screen. Unknown number, he answered, lifting it to his ear with a hand that was shaking from rage. You should have seen the nurse's face when we dragged her out of the car. Anthony Marchetti's voice came through, thick with triumph. She fought like a wild animal. Took 3 guys to hold her down. The kid didn't cry. Interesting. She just stared at us with eyes cold as ice. If you touch a single hair on them, what are you going to do? Anthony laughed. You're not in a position to threaten anybody, Blackwell. I've got what you want, and you've got what I need. What do you want? The notebook. And the envelope you just pulled from the locker. Don't act surprised. We've been watching you since you walked into Union Station. You've got 2 hours to bring everything to the abandoned warehouse at 327 West Industrial Road. Come alone. If I see cops or the FBI, the kid will be the first to die. What about Jerome? Your soldier. Anthony's voice curled with contempt. He tried to protect them. Brave, but stupid. He's alive, but he won't be for long if you don't do what I say. Anthony hung up. Marcus stood in the empty garage, his whole body trembling with a kind of fury he hadn't felt in 20 years in the underworld. He'd let them take Grace. He'd let them take Olivia. He'd failed the promise he'd made to Ryan Mitchell less than 10 minutes earlier. About 20 minutes away, inside an abandoned warehouse in the city's western industrial district, Olivia woke in the dark. Her head felt like it was splitting apart, and she tasted blood in her mouth. Someone had hit her from behind when she tried to protect Grace. The memory came back in flashes. The car door yanked open, rough hands pulling Grace out. Olivia fighting, scratching, kicking, doing everything she could to hold on to the child, but there were too many of them, and one blow to her head had dropped the world into black. Grace. Olivia tried to push herself up, but her body rebelled. She realized she was lying on cold concrete, her wrists bound behind her with tight plastic ties that had numbed her hands. Blood from a cut on her forehead ran down into her eyes, blurring her vision. I'm here, Miss Olivia. Grace's voice came from a dark corner of the warehouse. Olivia turned her head and saw the girl curled up a few feet away, her hands tied too. But what made Olivia's chest loosen was that Grace didn't look hurt. Her eyes were still bright, still alert, still carrying that unnerving calm Olivia had seen from the first night. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? I'm okay. Grace shook her head. But you're hurt. You're bleeding a lot. Olivia forced herself upright, her body trembling with pain and exhaustion. She inched closer to Grace, braced her back against the wall, and pulled the child in as close as she could. I'm fine, she said, trying to keep her voice steady even as the room spun. Marcus will come. He'll find us. Grace looked up at Olivia with eyes too old for her face. Are they going to hurt us? Olivia wanted to lie. She wanted to say everything would be okay, that no one would touch them. But she couldn't. Not with Grace, a child who could see through every adult lie. I don't know, Olivia whispered. But I promise you, no matter what happens, I'll protect you. I won't let them lay a hand on you. Grace pressed herself tighter into Olivia, her head resting against Olivia's shoulder. You're like my mom, Grace whispered. She always said she'd protect me too. Tears rose in Olivia's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had to be strong. For Grace. For a child who'd already lost too much and didn't deserve to lose anything else. She thought of Chloe, of the night 3 years ago when she hadn't been able to protect her daughter. She'd sworn she would never let that happen again. This time will be different, Olivia told herself. This time she won't fail. Light spilled in from a door opening somewhere deeper in the warehouse, followed by the sound of footsteps. Olivia held Grace tighter, her body going rigid, bracing for a fight. Marcus drove the Escalade out of the garage at a dangerously high speed. He didn't have time to panic. He didn't have time to blame himself. He had 2 hours. 120 minutes to find a way to save Olivia, Grace, and Jerome without handing Marchetti what he wanted. He pulled the envelope from his inner pocket and opened it while he drove. Inside was a thick stack of documents and a small business card that read, Catherine Chen, FBI Special Agent, along with a phone number. Marcus didn't hesitate. He dialed and waited. Agent Chen answered. Her voice was cool and professional. This is Agent Chen. My name is Marcus Blackwell. I have information on the Marchetti case, and I need to meet you right now. Silence held for a few seconds. Blackwell. Catherine Chen's voice changed, edged with caution. I know who you are. Why should I trust a Mafia boss? Because I have Ryan Mitchell's notebook. Because I have the envelope he left for you at Union Station. And because his daughter was just kidnapped by Marchetti along with 2 other people. If you want to end this case and save them, you'll meet me. Silence again. Then Catherine Chen gave him an address. 20 minutes later, Marcus pulled up in front of an ordinary office building in a Kansas City suburb. No FBI sign. Nothing that marked it as a federal location. He went inside and a man in a black suit escorted him to a room on the 3rd floor. Catherine Chen was waiting. She looked about 42, black hair cut short and neat, with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent her career facing the most dangerous people alive. Beside her, slumped in a chair with hollow cheeks and bloodshot eyes from lack of sleep, sat Ryan Mitchell. Grace. Ryan lurched to his feet when he saw Marcus. Where's my daughter? Marchetti got to her, Marcus said bluntly, along with a woman named Olivia and my man. They want an exchange within 2 hours. The notebook and the envelope for their lives. Ryan looked like he might collapse. Catherine Chen caught him and guided him back into the chair. Why are you here? Catherine asked Marcus, her voice still full of suspicion. To hand the evidence back to Marchetti. I'm here to offer cooperation, Marcus said, placing the notebook and the envelope on the table. I'll go to the exchange site like Marchetti demanded, but I need the FBI to surround the warehouse from the outside. When I give the signal, you move in. Catherine Chen studied Marcus, measuring him. Why should I trust you? You're a criminal, Blackwell. You and Marchetti are the same. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes burning. I'm a criminal. I'm not denying that. But I'm the kind of criminal who doesn't kidnap an 8-year-old child as a hostage. I'm the kind of criminal who doesn't kill innocent people to cover his tracks. Do you want to argue ethics? Or do you want to save a child and finish the case you've been building for 18 months? Catherine Chen stayed silent, weighing it. Then she nodded. All right, but you follow our plan. No exceptions. They spent the next 30 minutes building the plan. Catherine Chen would deploy a tactical team to surround the warehouse from every direction. Marcus would go in alone, pretend to make the exchange, and when he had an opening, he'd signal the FBI to hit. The risk was brutal. Marchetti could kill the hostages the instant he sensed a trap, but it was the only chance they had. When the meeting ended, Ryan Mitchell stepped toward Marcus. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but his eyes held a determination Marcus recognized immediately. The look of a father willing to do anything to protect his child. I want to go with you. No. Marcus shook his head. You'll only make things more complicated. That's my daughter. Ryan's voice broke. I left her alone for almost 2 days. I let her face all of this because I was too afraid to protect her. I can't sit here and wait while someone else risks their life for my child. Marcus looked into Ryan's eyes and saw the pain, the self-blame, and the unconditional love of a father. He remembered the 6-year-old boy abandoned outside a church 30 years ago. He remembered the dream of having a father who would come back. You love her, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. More than my life. Marcus nodded slowly. Then stay alive. Stay alive for her. She needs a father, not a dead hero. I'll bring her back to you. That's a promise. Ryan stared at Marcus for a long moment, then nodded, tears running down his cheeks. Thank you, he whispered. I don't know what to say except thank you. Marcus turned away without another word. He had a promise to keep. The abandoned warehouse sat at the end of a quiet industrial road, a gray concrete block with shattered windows and weeds climbing thick around its base. Marcus stopped the Escalade about 50 meters away, killed the engine, and stepped out. He knew the FBI was positioned all around, hidden in derelict buildings and behind rusted shipping containers. But from the outside, he looked like a lone man walking into a tiger's den. The warehouse's metal door groaned open as Marcus approached. Inside, hanging industrial bulbs cast harsh light onto a scene that made his blood boil. Olivia and Grace sat in the center of the warehouse with their hands tied, surrounded by more than a dozen gunmen dressed in black. Jerome lay motionless in a corner. Blood from a head wound dried into a dark stain on the concrete. Olivia had bruising on her face and dried blood on her forehead, but her eyes still burned when she saw Marcus. Grace pressed close beside her, her expression terrifyingly calm. Blackwell. Anthony Marchetti stepped out of the shadows with a victorious smile. You're right on time. I like that. Marcus didn't look at Anthony. His eyes stayed fixed on Olivia and Grace, assessing their condition, measuring distance, running options. Give them to me. Then you'll have what you want. Not so fast. Another voice came from behind Anthony, deep and commanding. I want to talk first. Marcus felt his body tighten as a man stepped into the light, 58 years old. White hair combed neatly back. A sharp, angular face and eyes cold as ice. Victor Marchetti. The boss himself had come. That wasn't in Marcus's plan, and it wasn't in the FBI's. Blackwell. Victor walked closer, his hands in the pockets of an expensive vest. I've always respected you. We've kept our distance for years. Your territory is yours. Mine is mine. Why are you breaking that balance for a child who has nothing to do with you? Because she's 8, Marcus replied, his voice steel cold. She's not a chess piece in your power game. Everyone is a chess piece. Victor smiled, but it never reached his eyes. You've been in this life long enough to know that. Her father betrayed me, stole what belonged to me, tried to destroy everything I built. The child is how I get it back. You're a monster. I'm realistic. Olivia spoke suddenly, her voice trembling with hate. Do you remember Derek Hayes? Victor turned toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly. Derek Hayes. Olivia repeated the name like a curse. My ex-husband. He owed you money. 3 years ago. He ran and caused a car wreck. My daughter died in that wreck. Chloe. 5 years old. Victor studied Olivia for a long moment, then shrugged. I don't remember every debtor. There are too many of them. Rage flared in Olivia's chest. 3 years of hell because of this man. 3 years of sleepless nights, haunted by Chloe's face in that crash. And he didn't even remember. I'll make sure you remember, she snarled. I'll make sure you pay for all of it. Victor gave a thin laugh and turned back to Marcus. She's got spirit. Shame she picked the wrong side. Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out the notebook and the envelope. This is what you want. Now let them go, Victor signaled to Anthony. Anthony stepped forward, took the notebook and the envelope, and flipped through a few pages to confirm. Then he nodded to Victor. It's real. Good. Victor turned away. Kill them all. Leave no witnesses. Everything happened at once. Marcus pressed the button on the phone hidden in his hand, the signal for the FBI to move. At the same moment, he lunged toward Olivia and Grace. Gunfire exploded from every direction as the FBI tactical team stormed in through windows and doors. Headlights from an armored vehicle flooded the warehouse with blinding light. Chaos swallowed everything. Marchetti's gunmen fired back. Bullets ripped through the air. Marcus dropped and rolled away from a burst of shots, then surged forward again toward the 2 females. He saw Anthony Marchetti raise his gun, aiming straight at Grace with the wild eyes of a man who knew he'd lost. If I can't have her, nobody gets her. Marcus was too far. He couldn't reach them in time, but Olivia could. She didn't think. She just moved. With everything she had left, she threw herself over Grace, using her body as a shield the instant the gunshot cracked. The bullet tore through her shoulder, pain like fire flooding her body. But Grace was safe. That was all that mattered. Miss Olivia. Grace's voice cut through the chaos as Olivia collapsed onto the concrete. Blood began to soak her shirt. Marcus finally reached them, dragging both of them behind a concrete pillar for cover. Olivia! He shouted, one hand pressing hard against the wound in her shoulder to slow the bleeding. Stay with me. Open your eyes. Olivia tried to smile, lips pale from blood loss. Grace, is she safe? She is. Because of you. Olivia closed her eyes, her awareness slipping as gunfire still echoed through the warehouse. The last gunshots faded away, giving way to FBI agents shouting orders and the hard click of handcuffs locking shut. Marcus still held Olivia and Grace tight behind the concrete pillar, one hand pressing down on Olivia's wounded shoulder to slow the bleeding, the other shielding Grace. When he finally lifted his head, he saw the scene he'd been waiting for over the last 2 days. Victor Marchetti was pinned to the floor by 2 FBI agents, his hands cuffed tight behind his back. The face of the once powerful boss was still ice cold, but the familiar arrogance had drained from his eyes. A few meters away, Anthony Marchetti lay motionless with a leg wound, muttering curses as agents hauled him away. I need medics now, Marcus shouted, his voice breaking with worry. Someone's hurt. 2 paramedics rushed over immediately with a stretcher and a trauma bag. They carefully placed Olivia onto the stretcher and started working on the wound in her shoulder. Blood had soaked a wide patch of her shirt, but the bullet hadn't hit a major artery. She still had a chance. Is she going to be okay? Marcus asked, his voice rough. It's not life-threatening, one of the paramedics replied. But she's lost a lot of blood. We need to get her to a hospital right away. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving Olivia. She was still unconscious, her face pale as paper, but her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. She was alive. She had risked her life to save Grace, and she was still alive. Marcus. Grace's voice came from beside him. Marcus turned and saw her staring toward the warehouse entrance, eyes wide. He followed her gaze and saw a figure running toward them, pushing past FBI agents, past gunmen in cuffs, past everything. Ryan Mitchell. Dad. Grace shot forward like a small bolt of lightning. Ryan dropped to his knees just in time as she slammed into his arms. He wrapped her up so tightly it was like he was afraid she'd vanish the second he let go. His shoulders shook with sobs, the tears of a father who'd believed he'd never hold his daughter again. I'm sorry, Ryan cried, his voice breaking. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry I left you alone. I'm sorry for everything. Grace didn't speak. She only clung to him, her face pressed into his chest. And for the first time since Marcus had met her at the Riverside rest stop almost 2 days earlier, for the first time since she'd been left alone for 18 hours, for the first time since she'd faced kidnappers and guns, Grace cried. She cried the way an 8-year-old is supposed to cry. No more terrifying calm. No more forced, too grown-up composure. Just a small girl crying in her father's arms, finally letting herself be the child she deserved to be. Marcus watched, and something in his chest tightened. He thought about the 6-year-old boy abandoned outside a church 30 years ago. The boy who waited for a father who never came back. The boy who never got to be held like that, who never got to cry like that. But today, watching Grace and Ryan, he felt a part of that old wound inside him begin, slowly, to heal. Boss. Jerome's voice came from behind him. Marcus turned and saw Jerome being helped along by 2 medics, his head wrapped in a white bandage, eyes still clear and alert. You okay? I've had worse. Jerome managed a small smile, though his face was still pale from the blow. Jerome managed a small smile even though pain still pulled at his face. I tried to protect them, but there were too many. You did good. Marcus clapped Jerome on the shoulder, then turned back toward Olivia as the paramedics wheeled her toward the ambulance. He moved fast to the stretcher and took her cold hand in his. Olivia, he said softly. Can you hear me? Olivia's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Her blue eyes were dull with blood loss and pain, but when she saw Marcus, a faint smile lifted her mouth. Grace, is she okay? She's okay. Marcus squeezed her hand tighter. Because of you, you saved her. Olivia closed her eyes again, the smile still there. Good, she whispered. This time I didn't fail. You didn't fail, Marcus said, his voice gentler than Olivia had ever heard it. You're the bravest person I've ever met. The paramedics began pushing the stretcher up into the ambulance. Marcus didn't let go of Olivia's hand, walking beside it until they loaded her inside. I'll be at the hospital, he said. Just rest. Olivia didn't answer. She'd slipped back into sleep from exhaustion and the pain medication the paramedics had given her, but her hand still held onto Marcus's, as if even unconscious. She didn't want to let go. The ambulance doors shut. The siren wailed as it pulled away, cutting through the dawn that was brightening over Kansas City. Marcus stood watching until the ambulance disappeared around the corner. Then he turned back toward Grace and Ryan, still holding each other in the ruined warehouse. Grace had stopped crying. Her head rested against her father's chest, her eyes closed in a peace she hadn't had for 2 days. The promise had been kept. 3 years later, the federal courthouse in Kansas City was packed on sentencing day. Victor Marchetti stood behind the defense table in an orange prison uniform, his face still ice cold, but the light of power that once lived in his eyes was gone. The judge read the sentence in a steady, even voice. Life in prison without parole. 47 counts, including money laundering, extortion, conspiracy to commit murder, and kidnapping. The empire he'd built over 4 decades collapsed completely because of one brave accountant and a notebook filled edge to edge with numbers. Anthony Marchetti received a sentence of 30 years in a separate trial. Names that were once spoken with fear were now just case numbers in federal records. Ryan Mitchell sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching the man who had nearly stolen his daughter's life get led away in handcuffs. He didn't feel joy. He didn't feel satisfaction. Only a deep relief, like a 1,000-pound weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. After the case, Ryan became a consultant for the FBI on financial crime investigations. His understanding of how laundering networks operated helped dismantle more criminal organizations, He turned the biggest mistake of his life into a chance to make amends. More than 200 miles east of Kansas City, in a small church outside Boston, Marcus Blackwell stood at the altar in a black suit, waiting for his bride to walk in. Olivia appeared at the end of the aisle in a simple white dress, her brown hair loose over her shoulders, the scar on her arm hidden behind a purple bouquet, Chloe's favorite color. She walked slowly, each step carrying the meaning of a long journey from darkness into light. Marcus watched her come toward him, and in his eyes, usually cold and unreadable, there was something he thought he'd lost a long time ago. Hope. Grace stood beside Marcus as the flower girl, 11 years old now, taller and more grown up, but still with bright eyes and a warm smile. When Olivia reached them, Grace took her hand and whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I love you, Mom," Olivia cried, not the tears of grief from 3 years earlier, but tears of happiness, of healing, of a woman who had finally found her reason to live again after believing she'd lost everything. She knelt and wrapped Grace in her arms, whispering into the girl's ear, "I love you too. Forever." 1 month after the wedding, on an autumn afternoon when the leaves were starting to turn gold and orange, the familiar black Escalade pulled into the Riverside rest stop on Highway 65. Marcus stepped out, followed by Olivia, Grace, and Ryan. The place looked the same as it had 3 years before, quiet and still, with the occasional truck passing through and wind moving over the fields beside the road. They walked to the corner of the curb, where Grace had sat alone for 18 hours on that fateful night. Marcus set down a small brass plaque, engraved with the words, "Sometimes miracles happen when someone doesn't walk away." Grace stared at the plaque for a long moment, then turned to Marcus. "Uncle Marcus, do you know why I didn't cry when Dad left me here?" Marcus shook his head. "Because my mom used to say that when I'm in trouble, I should believe someone will come help me. Mom said good people always show up when you need them most. I believed her, and she was right." Grace looked at Marcus, then at Olivia, then at Ryan. "You came. Miss Olivia came. And Dad came back. My mom up in heaven must be smiling so much." Marcus felt his eyes sting, a feeling he thought he'd forgotten how to have since he was a 6-year-old boy abandoned outside a church. He knelt down, level with Grace's eyes, the way he had the first night he met her. "I believe that too." The 4 of them stood together in the sunset, watching cars sweep along the highway. 4 people who had been wounded by life, who carried scars they thought would never heal, had found one another in the dark and walked out into the light together. This story reminds us that sometimes heroes don't come from where we expect. Sometimes they're people who have stumbled, who have made mistakes, who have been abandoned by the world. But those very scars give them the strength to heal someone else's wounds. There are promises that, once kept, change forever the lives of both the one who receives them and the one who keeps them. If this story touched your heart, if you believe kindness still exists in this world, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss meaningful stories every day. Please tap like and share this video with the people you love. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever met someone who didn't walk away when you needed them most? Share in the comments below. We'd love to hear the stories that live deep in your heart. Wishing everyone watching this video strong health, a joyful life, and peaceful days ahead. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.